Well, never for a moment imagine that there's not interstate rivalry in this country. And it's not just on the sporting field. State pride can mean someone in Victoria can't understand why anybody would live in New South Wales. And a proud South Australian would never consider shifting to Queensland or to WA. But different tax settings and debt levels post-COVID mean the outcomes for citizens and businesses, well, they can be vastly different depending on exactly where you are. And that's documented in the Commonwealth Bank's State of the State survey. CommSec Chief Economist Craig James joins me now. Craig, good to have you in person. It's always great. We're normally down the line. But it is real, isn't it, that there are different outcomes from people in different states?
Yes, and it occurs over different periods of time as well. So you go back through the history of the survey and it goes back to 2009, and you had states like Western Australia at the top, you had ACT at the top, then New South Wales and Victoria, and then Tasmania. Now it seems to be South Australia's turn at the top, and the central ingredient seems to be you've got to have some sort of driver of growth. And for Western Australia and for the Northern Territory, it was the infrastructure boom, it was the resources boom, of about 10 or 15 years ago. But so now, for a state like South Australia on top, it's population growth.
So population growth, I want to go there because we always see, sort of the best part of 800,000 net new migrants came in last year, including natural births as well. But then you've also got this other situation, there's intrastate migration, and that can't be ignored because that drives property prices, the need for infrastructure, jobs growth, all of those things are driven by that movement in population.
Yeah, a lot of people come to this country through Sydney and through Melbourne, they're the entry points. But then they get into those big economies, big states, and find, yes, the costs are a little bit on the high side. And they start exploring and they start moving around, yes, the countryside. And then they settle in places like Adelaide and in terms of Hobart. And they see that, yes, there's a high standard of living at a lower cost.
So we're looking here at the moment. WA's got the biggest population change, followed by Victoria. Now, some people might be surprised about that, but of course, Melbourne is set to overtake, in fact, already has overtaken Sydney in terms of being the biggest city in Australia.
Yeah, and certainly we're going to see an extensuation, yes, of those sorts of gains. But Western Australia is the one that's really got the momentum on its side. When we look at State of the States, we look at the latest observation and compare it with what's normal, the decade average, and we look across all the indicators. That's the way we can compare small states like Tasmania, or small economies like Tasmania, Northern Territory and the ACT against the bigger ones. And what we're seeing now is that Western Australia is starting to getting a little bit of momentum, and next quarter or the quarter after that, we could see Western Australia at the top of the leaderboard.
OK, but that is largely, and that's picked up in this survey, the employment prospects.
Yes.
We saw the unemployment rate out in Australia this week, which was better than expected, 3.8%. But the reality is, if you are a new migrant or if you are an interstate migrant travelling, you're going there in the prospect of work in most cases.
Yeah, and certainly there's a range of opportunities which exist in terms of Western Australia, particularly in the resources sector. But when you've got a strong resources sector, that has fallover effects to accommodation, to restaurants, to the bigger cities. So people move around across, to the west and lifts basically all boats.
OK, so South Australia has been on top of this survey for the past couple of surveys. Now, I've interviewed the Premier there, it's a very progressive state right now. Does that get picked up in this survey as well?
Well, we look across a whole range of indicators, anything that we can get, sort of timely measure of how the economy is travelling. So we look at things like retail trade, housing, finance, dwelling starts, construction work, business investment, you name it, we've got it in there. So we've got 8 key indicators. So it does give a good sense about what's happening. And so some people would look at some of these figures, like in the past we've had Tasmania on top and South Australia is now on top, and say, well, clearly this must be a fluke that they've got to the top. Well, South Australia is number 1 on 4 of the 8 indicators. So it's no fluke. It's basically consistent across the board.
And that is driven by government that's progressive, that's trying to bring opportunity and bring business into its state.
Yeah, and we see Northern Territory trying to do the same, but so it's got the harder job about it. Sort of trying to get people to come up to Darwin, the climate. Sort of you've got to get used to that climate. You've got to like the climate to be able to work there.
So tell me, do you sense that premiers, you get feedback from this survey that the premiers do genuinely compete to have their state considered as the best?
Well, it's supposed to be like a report card, so the school report card. You're going to get A's on things, you're going to get B's on things, you're going to get C's and D's. Some state premiers and treasurers seem to believe that we've got to set against them, so that they're not number one. We've got no control over the numbers. We've got the methodology, which has been the same right from the very beginning. And it's up to the state and territory ministers to be able to drive their economy forward.
I'll tell you what, Craig James, always great to chat to you. Good to do it in person today. Many thanks for your time.
Not a problem at all.